So, welcome back, everyone. If this is your first time joining us, welcome and thank you for spending the next hour with us talking about housing cooperatives and how to start one. So, Cooperatives First is based in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, in Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. Cooperatives First is a nonprofit business development organization created to bring awareness and support uh, new cooperative development in Western Canada. My name is Trista Piapiscanes, the Director of Indigenous Relations, and I have with me today Kyle White, our Director of Education. Um, so thank you once again for joining us here as we continue our conversation on housing co-ops. So our first session was actually our highest attended session that we've ever had. And there were great discussions and there were so many great questions that we could not get to everything in the first hour. So here we are for part two. Uh, the first session was based on what is a housing co-op. Uh, we do have that session recorded and you can check our website for the recording. Today, our focus will be on how to start your own housing co-op. And today we have Maria Vaiaso, Regional Manager of the Prairies uh, with the Cooperative Housing Federation Canada, and Monique Chenier from the Sunrise Corner Economic Development and the Southeast Manitoba Seniors Community Housing Co-op. So today, getting right into it, I'm going to ask Kyle, the big question is, what are the steps to starting a housing co-op?
Very cool. Thanks, Trista, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, no small task in starting a housing cooperative. It's a super big area of interest that we see at Cooperatives First, but isn't actually something that a lot of groups start with us, because creating a housing development, regardless of your approach, is challenging. It takes a lot of resources, it takes a lot of time, and a lot of momentum to stay sustained throughout that development process. And maybe just to give a very quick recap, if you attended our last housing co-op webinar, this will sound familiar, but just to contextualize what we're talking about, we had 4 ways of starting a housing development using co-ops. So I'll just very quickly touch on those because the process for moving one forward is kind of the same in all cases, but with slightly different steps. The first option for creating a housing co-op is a for-profit, sometimes called an equity or a market housing co-op, which is an alternative to condominiums or stratas where homeowners purchase their units and collectively maintain a co-op together. The second option is a non-profit housing co-op or a non-market housing co-op, and this is our most common model in Canada. This accounts for about 1/3 of all cooperatives in Canada. It's an alternative to renting and an alternative to home ownership. It allows people to live together in a nonprofit housing co-op, paying below market rents usually, and managing the co-op together. Those first 2 are what I would call conventional housing co-ops. The other 2 are what I would consider unconventional housing co-ops. The first of those is a community service co-op, and we'll hear from Monique later about one of those. And that's a more community-wide approach, where a community will come together to create a housing development, usually for a specific group of people, often seniors, but could also be marginalized individuals, individuals with disabilities. It won't necessarily be a tenant-owned housing co-op. And the final model, and this is a growing area of interest, I would say, in specifically rural communities, are approaching housing from a community investment model, where community members want to invest funds in a pool that will then go on to invest in businesses or assets, a growing interest of one being investing in rental housing or family housing that can be sold. We see good examples of this from Sangudo, and we had Dan Oler in our last webinar talking about their experience building homes with an investment co-op. So those are the four models that we see co-ops using to address housing. So what's it look like to start a housing co-op? Well, in all cases, and this is the advice we give to all of our clients, you must start with people. All co-op, regardless of your business model, need people to get started. And to get a co-op running, you really just need at least 3 people. Ideally more, but just 3 people will get that ball rolling. And when groups work with us, we always encourage, ensure you've got a few people and start doing that planning early. Planning is an essential component of building a housing development because there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of factors that need to be identified. So get your people together first and start doing some of that early planning. How many units does the housing co-op want to have? What are some potential sites? Is it realistic that we'll be able to find people to buy land, to build housing? Can we start having conversations with our municipality? And the second step, and I would recommend this fairly quickly, is incorporate the co-op. We recommend this to all of our clients as well. Incorporating sooner is almost always better for 3 reasons. 1, people will take you seriously. If you're a group of people who have an interest in something, that's fine. But if you're actually an incorporated entity, you're doing business as XYZ Housing Co-op, that's going to start more conversations more seriously because you're a company with a bank account, with ownership, and a plan to move forward. Secondly, it allows you to grow the co-op in a real way. You can actually sign people up as members, accept membership fees if appropriate, and deposit them into your bank account. You're actually building the co-op's membership. And third, you're ready to go if there's an opportunity to apply for a grant or approach a funder. It's always surprising. My colleague Kathy Edwards, our entrepreneur in residence, always says, don't be afraid to ask for money. So whether that's applying for a government grant or approaching your local credit union or a local business, ask for money because they have a vested interest in supporting the community as well, and that might involve supporting your co-op. The next step, and I don't want to undersell this, a lot of planning. Once you've got your co-op in place and you need to put together a bit of a plan for what the co-op's operations will look like, that's a lot of work and a lot of moving parts. It's at this point, we always recommend seeking out expertise. So that might include talking to housing developers, experienced housing support organizations like the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada, but it'll involve identifying potential service providers, contractors, getting support from your municipality, and identifying possible sites for the co-op. A lot of the things that feed into creating your cooperative's business plan. And that's something we can help with at Cooperatives First, but we often turn to experts on housing who can expedite that process because they have more experience in the housing game. Once you've got that good business plan in place, you also need to figure out the funding arrangement. And depending on the model you choose to move your housing development forward, that's going to impact what funding options are available to you. For example, if you're choosing to create a community investment co-op, the majority of your financial considerations will be with potential investors. So have conversations with businesses and those potential investors, those individuals in your town that might invest some money into the co-op. And again, it doesn't have to be a lot. The Sangudo co-op, I believe, had investments ranging from $5,000 to $50,000 per person. But when you get a good group of people together, that's a pretty serious amount of money that can be used to support housing. If you're approaching this from a nonprofit perspective, using a community service co-op or a nonprofit housing co-op, then you definitely want to take a look at CMHC, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation's programs. In particular, the National Housing Strategy Co-Investment Fund. That's certainly a big one. I think Monique will talk a bit about that. And I think in budget 2022, the federal government also made an announcement about co-op housing programs. And I think Maria will touch on that a little bit. But you're going to want to identify the funding pathway that's right for you. In all cases, funding usually looks like some combination of member investment to some degree, some sort of fundraising to some degree, and then some combination of provincial, municipal, or federal support. Depending on where you're located, you can access different programs. For example, BC Housing has a lot more housing programs than, say, Saskatchewan. So it's important to do the legwork to identify your different path to that overall fundraising goal. And of course, that earlier stage, that business planning, all that should iron out what that target should be. How many units you're building should inform the amount you need to raise. And then your next step is be patient. In all cases, the housing co-ops and developments that we've worked with, it takes time. I think every application process comes with a pretty lofty application and a waiting period, and then a funding period, and then there's a lot of steps with some waiting on either side of them. So if you're going down this path, be prepared for the time commitment. And then at the end, ideally, once you get that final really big pick from CMHC or your private investors, ideally you can break ground and start building. Now, there's a lot of things that lead up to that, so I think that's a good place for me to stop and turn it over to folks who are in the midst of this process as a supporter and as a group going through it themselves. Thanks.
Thank you, Kyle. So as you mentioned, this is a good segue. Next, I am going to call on Maria Vaiaso from CHF Canada. She's the regional manager of the Prairies. And my question is, can you let us know what CHF Canada does, and what is the process for people wanting to start a housing cooperative?
Perfect. Thanks for that, Monique. So I am just going to share my screen here. Can everyone see that? Great. Okay, so as Monique said, my name is Maria Vaiaso. I'm with the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada. So what CHF Canada does is we provide support to those continuing not-for-profit housing cooperatives that Kyle had described earlier as sort of the largest, most predominant type of housing cooperative here in Canada. And so my role would be to provide direct support to the housing cooperatives across the prairies. And with that are a few other departments of CHF Canada who are available to provide direct services. So one of those departments is our asset management team, and another is around our development team, which I think is a particular interest to this group today. So to share the story, there we go. So what had happened with CHF Canada is in the 70s and 80s, there was a giant boom of continuing housing cooperatives that were developed and built across Canada. And in the early 90s, as government programming ended that supported that, that development really slowed to a near stop. And so a few years ago, sector leaders started to come together and talk about co-op housing and how anybody who wanted to be a member of a housing co-op should be able to enjoy the benefits of membership without spending a lifetime on a waiting list if they could even get onto one. And so they talked about what are the problems with the sector right now, and what are some of the solutions so that we can grow and expand this really the best kept secret in housing, as we consider it. So part of that is, of course, we need to develop new cooperative housing. And the other half of that is making sure that the housing cooperatives that currently exist are strengthened, that we don't lose any to the sector, and that those housing cooperatives are able to continue to develop. And so it's been a really interesting conversation, really about innovation. So how are we doing things now? How could we do things differently so that we could see an expansion in the sector? So, Kyle was talking about some of those solutions with different types of cooperatives, and we're looking at even more solutions as far as land trusts are concerned, thinking about things like unified housing cooperatives, where we take a mix of non-member and member participation on our board to change the way we do things. And so we're looking at growing and expanding that sector in new, unique ways, along with the existing ways. So the development resources that are available right now. So Kyle had spoken to the budget announcement from 2022, which resulted in a federal budget commitment of $1.5 billion to expand the cooperative housing movement across Canada. So uniquely, the federal government invited CHF Canada and the cooperative housing sector to support the co-design of this program. So the Cooperative Housing Development Program, known as CHDP. So this represents the first federal investment in new cooperative housing supply since the termination of the federal cooperative housing program in 1992. A dedicated housing development program is critical to sustaining and growing the co-op sector and providing an affordable alternative to Canadians experiencing the housing crisis. Now, I'm sorry to say that CHF Canada has signed a confidentiality agreement with CMHC that has allowed for us to provide this input, but it also means that we're not able to share a lot of the details of this program just yet. So we're hoping to have more information that can soon be released to our members, likely in early 2024. What I can tell you is that the program is a mix of loans and grants. So similar to the National Housing Strategies Co-Investment Fund, projects will have to meet a certain criteria on affordability, energy efficiency, and accessibility targets. It's a capital program, meaning that the funds will support the construction of both new co-op units, so both brand new units or new land or infill development on existing land. The program does not have any operating dollars attached to it, and there will be no subsidies for ongoing funding post-construction. So we're hoping to see projects come forward from all areas across the country and encourage you to think about how you might want to take advantage of this historic funding and be part of the next generation. So, often I'm asked, what will be happening in the prairies, with that $1.5 billion. Often those investments, they look to happen in major centers like Vancouver or Toronto. How can we ensure that money is spent in the prairies? And so realistically, CHF Canada is not in the market of developing housing cooperatives. We're in the business to support you to develop housing cooperatives. And so we need, as Kyle said, that energetic bunch of people that want to come together for that common goal, to build housing. So once you think you might be ready for that, we're open to have a conversation. So the first place to go, we've got a website. Here's the QR code, and I'll share this link again in the chat, so you'll be able to access it. So there's development resources, including a curated list of resources for housing co-ops interested in adding new co-op homes. So we've sifted through numerous sites and documents to bring together the most relevant ones to our members. So those include documents, videos, and websites. And the development process from the start of initiating the discussion with your co-op all the way through the final stages of construction. So it's posted to the members portal, so it's available to all CHF Canada members. We also have a referral program. So there's a consolidated list of development professionals ready to work with co-ops in regions all across the country. And these consultants have offered preferred pricing to our members. They have experience with not-for-profit and affordable housing projects. There is an online self-assessment tool. So it's a questionnaire that you, your board members, or your manager can fill out to reflect how ready your co-op is to begin working with a consultant or pursuing a development project. And then there's the CADCO Toolbox Plus program, which teaches participating housing organizations and businesses about capacity planning, internal finance, project risk assessment, land acquisition, funding and financing, and more. So this program is available for free until the end of 2024 for all CHF Canada members. So once you've gotten your housing co-op started, as Kyle was saying, the best thing to do is to reach out to CHF Canada. We have a class of membership for co-ops that are in development. And so we can help get you started even before that, you know, to have the conversation about what's your innovative idea and how can we help support that. So I'm going to share that information here in the chat, and that's it for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Maria. That was amazing and great support for everybody who's looking to start their own housing co-op. So next, we're going to turn it over to Monique, and Monique is from the Sunrise Corner Economic Development, and she has been a powerhouse through the Southeast Manitoba Seniors Community Services Cooperative. So welcome, Monique. And I'm just going to start it off with describe your co-op.
Thanks, Trista. Hello, everyone. The Southeast Community Services Co-op was formed 3 or 4 years ago with the, huge help from Kyle. Kyle met our CAO at the local Association of Manitoba Municipalities conference. And in the meantime, a local nonprofit organization called East Borderline Community Housing had been fundraising and looking at housing for seniors for 20 years in this region. They had success working with Southern Health and the provincial government about a dozen years ago, getting independent living apartments built in Sprague, Manitoba. But then a change of government led to a stall out on phase 2 and 3 of the project, which was hoped to be assisted living and then long-term care. So all in a central location with a primary health care center incorporated as well. So they had completely stalled out, change of government, and came to the municipality to ask about how they could kickstart this program again. And that's when the idea for a co-op was born. So Kyle talked to us about what the plan was, suggested a community services co-op rather than a housing co-op that would be very community driven, not necessarily owned by the people who lived there, but that the whole community could contribute, and we could look at other services in addition to housing. So we were looking at potentially adding transportation. We've had discussions around a daycare, but all those things can fall under the one co-op organization. So we are looking at that. In 2019, Kyle helped us get incorporated, helped us with our bylaws. We received assistance from Co-operatives first to get our business plan done for the Timberline Community Housing Project. It is intended to be a 20-room assisted living community located on Treaty 3 territory in Sprague, Manitoba. We had originally planned opening in 2025. It was it was spearheaded by 3 organizations coming together. So East Borderland Community Housing, nonprofit charitable organization that can provide tax receipts. The municipality came on board. The local council has given support in concept to this kind of housing co-op going ahead. And then we had our local Chamber of Commerce come on board as well. So it gave us a very diverse group of stakeholders really to help drive this forward from 3 different perspectives, which also allowed us to I guess, apply for lots of different kinds of grants. So they could come from a municipal perspective, a nonprofit, or a community group. So it's been a really good partnership. We've had our 2nd annual general meeting now, and have membership on our board of directors from beyond those original 3 groups. So the community really is seeing the value of the project.
That's great. That's seems like such a large project. How are you able to fundraise, or what kind of things like initiatives have you done to fundraise for the housing co-op?
Yeah, it is a large project. I mean, our initial business plan showed about an almost $5 million project. We are going ahead with updating our business plan because from late 2019 to now, things have changed pretty significantly on building costs. So we are getting our business plan updated so that we know exactly what our target is. But we started with funding from cooperatives first in pulling together the business plan. We had some initial investment from East Borderland Community Housing. So the nonprofit has been fundraising for the better part of 20 years. So they provided some assistance and a financial commitment to hire a consultant to help us start working on funding applications through CMHC. So the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation applications are intimidating, I'll say. So they are very detailed, and really having a business plan, in my mind, is the only way to really get through that application. So we hired a consultant to help us with that. They also helped with market research and started a marketing process. In the meantime, we got some additional funding we applied for through the Co-operators Foundation. So the Cooperative Development Grant gave us some additional funding to help with the in-depth market research. It helped with marketing. The Manitoba Cooperative Association also gave us some funding to contribute to that marketing. So now that we're formed as a legal co-op, we have bylaws, we're having our AGMs, we have a beautiful website at secsc.ca. Go check it out. And we have an online form to sign up for membership. So we've been developing all these tools to really position ourselves as a legitimate initiative. And I think what Kyle said earlier holds true, that getting incorporated and showing the world that you are an actual organization has been helping in a big way. So then the CMHC seed funding application went in a year ago, about last November, October, and that whole time thing and waiting, we learned January 31st that we received the seed funding grants that we applied for, and we're now working on architectural drawings, geotechnical surveys, those kinds of things of the site that is being provided by the East Borderland Community Housing. They had bought a piece of land nearby with the plan to build these additional levels of care. And so we've got that all underway now. So again, it's a next step towards the other CMHC grants that require things like architectural drawings and geotechnical reports. So we're sort of building up to the National Housing Co-Investment Fund and some of those other big ones, because without those, it's really difficult. I mean, we'll look at a capital campaign here locally. We'll look at local corporate, non-government groups as well. But at this point, CMHC seems to be our best source of significant funding to get this built.
Thank you for that answer, Monique. And I really want to thank you for your time and your insights. Do you have anything else you want to add, or would you like me to start with questions from the audience?
Well, let's start with some questions and we'll see where it goes.
Okay. So I'll start pulling up some of the questions. The first question we have is, are the funding sources mentioned in today's webinar being compiled, and could those be shared with the attendees via email? So, yes, they are.
Yeah. I'll hop in. As Maria's been sharing a few of their resources and making mention of a few things, I've pulled up the links on my end. So yeah, we can definitely compile those and share them. There were also a handful that were mentioned in our last webinar when we had CMHC as one of our panelists. We'll send those out as well.
Okay. And also today's webinar is being recorded, and it will be and the recording will be available online in a couple days. So the next question we have is, in what capacity did the Chamber of Commerce play a part in this development?
The Chamber of Commerce was one of the players who came to the table. You know, that's where you need people. The Chamber of Commerce is all about you know, quality of life in our region, and working with business owners to create the environment where businesses want to grow and potentially relocate here. So you know, they had an interest in housing. Ours, like a lot of other regions, especially rural, have very limited rental housing, and just housing in general. So certainly providing a place for seniors to age in place, where we can, you know, get them out of their family homes on large acreages or farms and get them into a level of care that they can stay in the region, and then open up those homes for families to move in and start businesses. So that was the direction that the Chamber of Commerce came to it from. Two members of each of the three organizations formed our original board of directors. So Kyle said we needed at least three. We had six. Two from the municipality, two from the Chamber of Commerce, and two from East Borderland Community Housing. And now they're continuing to play a support role in promoting the effort. They're selling memberships, they're helping with fundraising. So that's how they're staying involved with the project.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next question, and so it's from Clayton, asking about what is the relationship between a community development corporation and a new housing cooperative? Can the CDC develop one on its own, or should it be a separate entity altogether?
That's a good question. I would say it probably depends on the approach you're taking to the housing development. If the goal is to have a tenant-owned organization, there might be some sort of relationship that can be figured out with the CDC, which could support with investment or buying land or something like that. That could expedite the process. That's certainly good. And I would say all housing co-ops should be in communication with their municipalities to try and find those efficiencies, especially now with the federal government introducing the Housing Accelerator Fund. There's a good incentive for municipalities to promote housing development. So have those conversations with your municipality. And if the municipality has a CDC, that's also great. If you're going for more of a community service co-op model or a community investment model to build housing for other groups or to attract people to your community, then get creative. If the CDC has money and it's looking to park that money in some assets, why not start a community investment co-op, have the CDC be one of the big investors, and recruit some additional investment from the rest of the community to build some more housing. If it's a community service model, maybe the CDC is looking to provide some of that initial fundraising investment or donate some money. But if you've got those resources, use them to your advantage. Get creative, but have those conversations early, I would say.
Thank you, Kyle. Um, so the next question is, I'll put it out to everybody here. For someone starting from scratch, generally, how long does it take from the initial idea to operating a housing co-op? Should be expected to be a 5-year plan or a 15-year plan?
Well, I can talk to that one to start with. I started as economic development officer here in late 2019. The co-op discussion had already started at that point. I mean, obviously we had a nonprofit who had been working at this for years, but I think 2019 or 2018 maybe is when Kyle and our CAO connected, started talking about the options. When I got included in the discussions, we started moving ahead with our business plan was underway. Our bylaws, Kyle helped us work through bylaws. They provided, a template of bylaws that we could tweak to meet our needs. Got registered with the company's office by the end of the year. And then early 2020, we had our business plan completed and started working on the CMHC seed funding application at that point. It took till the end of 2022 to complete that. So we are, a volunteer board. There is some, time that I put in as economic development officer with housing as one of my main priorities to this initiative to help out. But we had the consultant working on that. So at this point, we've got to the seed funding stage. We look forward to some other grant opportunities through CMHC. We have applied for Housing Accelerator Fund grants as well. I don't know how quickly we'll hear back on that, but the last time it was 8 months from when we heard from our seed funding application. So certainly when we built our business plan in early 2020, we had planned a January 1st, 2025 open date so that we would be fundraising now. Construction would start in 2024. Now that we're revising our business plan, and we did have some delays over COVID, and then just the time, waiting for some of the funding to be approved. We're still vaguely on track for that, but it is getting to be a bit of a stretch to plan to be open for January 1, 2025. But so it is definitely a long-term project, and our nonprofit funder, the East Borderland Community Housing, has a fair bit of funds they've been raising over the last 10, 20 years to contribute to this, but certainly not nearly enough to cover the whole project. So other grants will take time, and we'll need to get those in place.
Maria, you'd like to answer that question as well?
Absolutely. So, across Canada, we're really seeing a variety of timelines. So I'm thinking of a project over on the East Coast where some sector leaders had made a connection with the federal government and acquired land and buildings that are pre-existing, put together a board of directors, and were able to, turn that project into a housing cooperative within the span of about a year. I'm thinking about another project in Winnipeg that's really a jewel of a housing cooperative where a group of volunteers came together, very ambitious, and thought of this housing cooperative that they wanted to share together. That project is now, the building is 5 years old, but the cooperative is 12 years old. So it took about 7 years from the inception to people actually moving in. So it really depends a lot on the energy, the partnerships, the consultants who you can bring in. The more experts you can bring in, the more access to funds, the more creative you can get, is really gonna stretch your timeline shorter or longer.
Yep. Yeah, I would say the question I think had, is it 5 years? Is it 15 years? On the low end, there's a handful I think I've seen that are less than 5 years. But as we've noted on the high end, it could go for quite some time. And again, the model you choose will probably shape that timeline. If you're looking at a big tenant-owned facility, 20, 40, 100 units, that's going to take time. If you're looking at a community investment model, investing in an 8-plex to build just more rentals in your community, you can probably do that in a year and a half or something like that. So form follows function, and that kind of determines your timeline.
Thank you, everyone. So the next question I have is, I'll pose it to Maria. You mentioned a developing member with the CHF. So how does one become a developing member?
Yeah, so there's an application on the website if you're a member in development. I believe it's $137 per year for the cooperative, and would give you access to resources, staff attention, templates, and such to help as you fill in your developing needs.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question that came from the audience are there existing models in place to demonstrate a rental cooperative housing model so it could create more affordable rental costs? And what are some considerations to keep in mind when approaching this model?
That's a good question, and I think timing is really good on this. There's a webinar I attended recently that I think CHF featured, but there was a report that was done that took an analysis comparing housing co-op rents with market rents in, I believe it was 5 cities across Canada: Vancouver, Toronto, Edmonton, and I think Montreal or Quebec City. And the finding was that co-op housing costs were on average $150 to $500 less than average rents in each of those cities. And there's a number of reasons for that. The folks in the report, and we'll share a link to the report in the chat and in a follow-up, they found that there's a couple of reasons that contribute to that. Again, accessing some grants is a part of it, and there's cost savings with that, and then there's cost savings with building a larger development and some efficiencies that can be built into the building process. But a really big part of it comes from the long-term life of co-ops versus market rentals. Market rentals that are controlled by larger housing corporations will often pull out the equity that's accrued in those developments to invest in their next developments. The same is true for many private landlords. And that kind of creates an arrangement where rent must always go up to service debt and to build more equity, to build more housing, and it's a cycle. Co-ops don't have that problem. Because co-ops exist primarily to provide housing, not profit, they can focus on a more at-cost model, and usually that means they'll be below market rents in perpetuity. But Maria can maybe speak to this better than I can too.
No, that was great, Kyle. I just wanted to add on that the other thing that made the co-ops of the last generation very successful is their partnerships with government. And so they were able to maintain similar subsidy programs to what Manitoba Housing, Saskatchewan Housing Corporation, those sorts of organizations offered right within their housing communities. So in addition to being able to provide below market rents, then they could also help to support lower income members directly in their communities. So most of those partnerships nationwide have been ending, and there haven't been new partnerships thus far in the prairie provinces that have happened, but the changes are starting to happen. So I know Manitoba has been quite eager to talk about partnership and different funding models. In Saskatchewan, we were able to meet with the Minister of Social Services and tour a housing co-op just last week. So there is a willingness and an appetite to partner, and we would love to see, that deep affordability within housing co-ops again.
Thank you so much, Maria. We have another question. So can a developer builder start a co-op on a land owned by them where they could build a for-profit housing co-op but service low-income housing to make greater number of housing available to the residents?
Good question. Hard question. I'm going to say yes and no. A single individual can't create a housing co-op. You do need to have a group of people doing that. If a developer does that and builds homes on land that they own, usually that's what a condominium or strata model is designed for. You could, however, if you're that developer builder, get that ball rolling. You could definitely start doing some development, and at the same time, there may be people in your community that do want to access homes, could be a for-profit housing, could be low-income housing, that might create that co-op that may eventually acquire that land and building from the developer.
Maria.
Yeah, I've recently heard of a really neat project in Toronto that is actually a condominium, but they have gifted certain units to become a housing cooperative. So there is a housing cooperative and scattered units throughout that condo building who come together. So they're able to provide affordable housing in their non so much affordable condo building. So there are neat solutions happening all over.
That's such an amazing model, and I'd love to hear more. So if there are any final questions for the panelists, like this has been, once again, this has been an amazing discussion, and I want to thank everybody for being here today. So we have a few more minutes if anybody has any questions. So I'm going to ask each one of you if what is the one takeaway you want to share with somebody who's going to be starting a housing co-op? So say there is a group of people who are just in the incorporation stage. What is the one piece of advice you would like to give? I'll start with Maria.
Well, put me on the spot, will you? So I think the first piece of advice is, stick with it. There's lots of help and resources available, so don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help. Building community is all about starting with community. So, look around, look for the energy, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
Okay, I will move on to Monique.
I would say try to get together a diverse group of individuals or organizations that are interested in getting involved in the project. I think because we started here with, driven by a nonprofit, they can give tax receipts for anyone for all their fundraising initiatives. So that allows us to, you know, funnel that money through the nonprofit into the housing co-op, you know, as a way to, I guess, help donators give more. So having the nonprofit piece in there, having the municipality in there, the municipality applied for the Housing Accelerator Fund. The co-op teamed up with the nonprofit, applied for the seed funding application. And so we're looking for opportunities with different grants and different funding programs that these various types of organizations can come together. I mean, me as an economic development, I'm Sunrise Corner Economic Development. I work in 2 municipalities, but I'm not an actual legal entity. So I am funneled through the municipality. So I provide advice and assistance, but unfortunately not set up as a CDC, which would give us another way to apply for funding as well. So I think having those different organizational structures at the table together can really diversify the way you can apply for funds.
Kyle, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you the same question.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, I would say from a high level, keep flying at it. If you see housing as a need in your community, and I would argue every community across Canada sees housing as a need, because we are suffering from both an affordability and an availability crisis in Canada. Average home costs and average rental costs are skyrocketing, some of the highest in the world. And I think the statistic is by 2030, we're going to be 3.5 million homes short of what we need in Canada. Those are big numbers. And to address it, it has to be us. Ordinary folks, like all those on the call, like community economic development coordinators, like municipalities, need to figure out together how we build those homes and how we ensure those long-term solutions are in place to ensure they're affordable. Because we've had 3 decades of leaving it up to the market to solve, and we have the current housing crisis that we currently have. We've got to think of these new creative solutions and these partnerships to get the job done, to make sure we've got both availability and affordability in check.
Thank you. A comment came in, but it's not really a question, but Fred Van Belay said a nonprofit partnership is entirely how they got their first project going. So thank you, Fred, for sharing. The last question I have for today is, what is the role of the Regional Co-op Federation development in helping start new housing co-ops? So.
Yeah, so your regional federation, whether it be NACHA, SACHA, CHFBC, COCHEF, you know, there's regional federations throughout Canada. So we're working in collaboration with that federation to ensure that the development needs are being met throughout the country. So whether you reach out to your regional federation first or CHF Canada first, you know, everyone will be invited to that table.
Thank you so much, Maria. So that is the last of our questions. So any final words? I'll start with Monique.
I look forward to connecting with CHF Canada because we haven't done that yet. So obviously I've been making notes here, so I'll be reaching out. But I think going back to trying to get as many partners at the table and take advantage of the resources that are there. Certainly, we wouldn't be where we are without cooperatives first and all the help that Kyle gave us. Certainly from the business plan, getting registered, answering a bazillion questions on bylaws and registration, and even taking us through some board training. So to help our board get a real understanding of co-ops and how we're structured, I think has put us off into a really strong start. And so I just want to, shout out to Kyle and the team at Cooperatives First for helping us get to where we are.
Thank you so much. Maria, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to say congratulations for thinking about this. It's it's a big step and you're part of a bigger movement. I'm so excited to have really off the wall innovative conversations about what we can do together. And I'm really anxious to support you. The other resources I wanted to mention on the CHF Canada website around the co-op housing for all vision, there's actually a peer network of people who have led innovative projects across the nation, who are willing to share their experience and their knowledge. So if you're looking for that one-to-one peer connection of somebody who's maybe started a housing co-op or done an expansion or development project, certainly reach out and we can try and make that link as well.
Thank you so much. And Kyle, any final words for today?
Yeah, absolutely. I hope no one's been scared off of the idea of doing a housing development, because it's a big job. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money. But I would argue there's never been more support for housing developments and housing co-ops specifically than there are today. We've got new initiatives from the federal government. We've got lots of housing specialized support from groups like CHF Canada and those regional federations. And you've got lots of co-op support from our team at Cooperatives First. So if you want to move forward on this, there's lots of people who are ready to support you. You just need 3 people and a lot of passion.
Thank you. So once again, this has been such an informative discussion, and I want to thank Maria, Monique, and Kyle. And before we leave today, we appreciate everybody who attended, everybody who's reached out and asked questions and continues to reach out. So if you have any further questions, please feel free to contact any one of us. Cooperatives First, we're here to help and answer any questions you may have. And we have upcoming on November 30th at 1 p.m. Mountain Time, we have our next Creating Connections workshop with Kyle. And again, thanks and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you from myself and our team at Cooperatives First. Until next time, Westes.